Okay, hello. Yep, okay. So let's see. Notes. Okay, welcome back to the Tokyo Jazz. Welcome back to the Tokyo Jazz Joints podcast. This is episode 88. 88. Two eights, two fat ladies. Is that the bingo call? 88. I think it's two fat ladies.
Just thinking that it's so.
Do they still say that?
So clearly 8 a.m. for you because you sound about on 1/3 energy levels. So that's what I was.
Well,
thinking
actually,
about
it's
8.
nearly. Oh no, it's 9/8. I was going to say it's also 8 a.m., but it's actually 9 a.m. So that doesn't work. Anyway, how are you this morning? Today?
Well,
this week?
I'm great.
This point in time,
I'm feeling good. Been a real musical week. A lot of podcasting done, some radio stuff done, new albums downloaded, new albums bought, jazz cafes visited. You know, Philip, my life doesn't really change that much. So when I'm back here in Yokohama, it was a good music week, and that's as much as we can ask for given the state of the world, which we won't go into. So, feeling pretty good. How about you? In between all of your fashion appointments and fancy brunches and whatnot.
Not sure what a fashion appointment is, but I'd say the weekend's about to go downhill probably after this. But Let's hope we can keep up that fantastically musical weekend with episode 88, in which we will be covering quite a few places. Some 3 that we went, and then as per the previous episode, you abandoned me for reasons unspecified. Brackets. Going to walk a dog, but it was quite a day. So this is like day 4 now of my trip already, and been to a few nice places, and of course happily finally got a camera that's actually functioning properly now, so I was ready for it. And I kicked off this day. I was staying the first few days, I stayed in my old neighborhood Shimokitazawa, so I kicked off this day actually by meeting the very lovely Zach from OG Records, who I mentioned on the previous episode. We actually met then for a coffee, and it was fantastic. It was really nice to meet him. Great guy. He was on a buying trip, obviously, and actually that day he was heading off after we met to go to the post office and do all his business with shipping. I think he'd said about 500 records back to the shop in Melbourne, and we, you know, as men of a certain age tend to do, we also went briefly to a couple of record shops together. So again, my sort of record buying embargo, which had stopped me buying the Shinsuke Fujieda album the day before, really fell flat at Shimokitazawa, where I came across a couple of things. One was the Midnight Sugar album by Tsuyoshi Yamamoto. So I thought, you know what? I'll just buy these. And then I had one of those beautifully sort of frustrating disc union experiences where they have all this incredible music, but you just don't get really much interaction or any crack with the staff at all. So I went up and bought the records and said, I wonder, would it be possible for you to just keep these? I'll pay for them now, but could you just keep them over, you know, and I'll pick them up again next week. And it was like I'd asked, could I move into his house? He just went, no, we can't do that. And I said, even though I've bought them, no.
See, so then, I remember
off I went into a rant.
I was expecting more of the old Japanese ward office type of, okay, you can do that, but it will require 7 copies of this form. We'll have to photocopy your ID, and we need a local cell phone number, and then we'll just like.
I would have done that.
You know, you clearly would have done that, yeah. But I think what's more interesting is that your record embargo of 4 days, and as I know, there would be many, many more over the next 2 weeks. So
it was absolutely pathetic.
I
ended up with a handful of records.
Listeners are going to be riveted, though. We do know that many people listening are fellow collectors, so they're going to be happy to hear about what you've added to the library.
Well, you know what? My good friend Tom very kindly, as always, helped me out of a hole. So I think on the following day, possibly it was, or the day after, I went up to his apartment. They had this magical sort of post box thing where you just go and put like a bit like a coin locker, but even fancier in his apartment lobby, where you go in, you put in, open a box, stick it in, put in a little code, and then I just send him the PIN number when he comes home. He just opens up the thing, and he kept the records for me for a couple of weeks. So all was well, but it didn't help my impression of the kind of reaction you often get in disunion. Now, they did take the book and they did sell the book up in Ochanomizu, but I remember even that process of going in and selling the book to them, or trying to at least convince them to take it, and just how cumbersome that was, where they kind of, they had me running around the houses, and I came back the following week, and then it was just, here's a business card, and it was just, I just was getting no contact with anyone. So yeah, it was very, very computer says no, if you know that, if you know that reference. But anyway, look, that was a good start to the day, but we headed up back into Chiba. Should have stayed up there. Back into Chiba.
It was
not
a
quite,
very, very different part of Chiba, and also this.
Yeah, not the wilds of Chiba, right?
The day. So yesterday on this trip, when we were talking about Django and MJQ at Mobara, way out east, where we had gone separately, as we talked about last episode. But this part of Chiba was a bit more on the north side, and Philip, you're forgetting that, this was the last day of Golden Week, the Golden Week spring holidays for me, before going back to work. And it was a dreary, rainy day.
Oh, it was a wet one. Yeah.
And it
was not nice.
I was working at home in the morning, and I was feeling extremely unmotivated to leave my apartment, my house, and get out for an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes.
Yeah, because it's further for you, right? I mean, I sort of forget you're coming from further south than Tokyo. Because even in Shimokitazawa, it's like, oh, this is like really quite a trek. But then you've got another 45 minutes.
I was running a little bit late, but I was like, look, you're here for the trek. I can't use that excuse. So grabbed my umbrella, took the train all the way out to a station called Goko, which is not one that Goko. I think either of us had ever heard of before. Goko Station in Matsudo City. It's just in the sort of the northwest part of Chiba, and not the most scenic place we've ever been on a rainy Tuesday morning. I would say Goko is, it has a long shotengai, that kind of covered shopping street that the old Japanese neighborhoods have, but it was completely deserted. You had already arrived at the first place, and I was wandering the streets in and out of the rain underneath the covered shopping street, trying to find it, getting more and more cranky at around, I would say it was about 1 o'clock or so by the time I got up there. And then finally, on a side street, coming to this unbelievably gorgeous green awning that says Jazz in Tea Garden. And right away, I knew. You were kind of giving me a little bit of warning, just like, prepare yourself. That was, I think, what your text said, right?
My first
saying, be ready.
My first note just says wild in capital letters. I mean, again, it's just... once again, like you go up, like you said, you go up. It's a miserable day. I don't like the rain. Full stop. I had sensibly bought an umbrella. I wasn't in that much of denial, but I'd bought an umbrella, so I sort of got there, and it was just like far, and it was a little bit kind of humid, and you're just like, oh, like this is just. And then of course you go into this place, and like it's a small place. I mean, you cannot explain how packed with just stuff it was, not in a messy way, but like just the walls covered with things, the tables, the shelves, every single spare piece of surface was covered with something, mostly jazz related, although as I'll get on to, not completely always.
It's interesting because it's a tiny, it is like a tiny attached house, 2 stories, okay, but very narrow. And the front door sort of opens up, and as soon as you walk in, I mean, you could literally just immediately trip over the person sitting by the front door, right?
Oh, you're just in there straight away, right?
Yeah, there's no space. The counter, the tiny little counter / kitchen, and kitchen is in quotation marks. Okay, is on the right, and on the left is a couple tiny seats it could seat about 2 people right by the door and another 2 people right behind it. And just floor to ceiling are album covers. And what I have written in the notes here, just wow, as much Americana decor as we've ever seen. And by Americana, I mean that kind of like Route 66, old Schlitz beer signs, a lot of like our old gal Marilyn Monroe, like these kinds of like really vintage Americana stuff. But what was interesting, and now we've seen that a lot before, Philip, in both jazz places and non-jazz places. But what really struck me was as I sat down to look around Tea Garden and take in all of these different album covers and posters and vintage things, was just like there was a lot more variety, because right next to a whole bunch of Doris Day albums, and then there was a Creedence Clearwater like flyer from a gig that the owner had actually went to. And I was thinking, like, okay, this guy's listening to a lot of different kinds of music here. And then, again, looking closely at one of the outdoor signs, it says jazz, Dixie, blues, R&B. So he's basically, the name of the joint is Jazz and Tea Garden. And yet he's basically got a collection of all these types of American music. And believe me, he might have been the most willing jazz master we've met to actually share his collection. It wasn't 30 seconds before I sat down that he came out with like some of these old magazines and started showing it to us.
Yeah, but you're sort of skipping ahead, because, I mean, I'd been there for probably 25, 30 minutes already. And at this point, he had already engaged heavily in conversation. I'd already chatted to him. I was taking some photos. And what he basically started to do almost instantly was pull out stuff to play. And so by the time you had arrived, he had already had out the old Columbia record player, like with the lid. And he was playing these kind of SP records and these 78s. So like we were sat there listening to like St. James Infirmary, and like some of these old like gramophone records.
And the V-discs, right? Those old
V-discs.
Yeah,
the V-discs. So he had this whole thing, and so he was showing me these, and we were just sat there, the two of us, and he was like, the sound is completely different. And I'm thinking, this is just like already like unbelievable. And again, that feeling of like, it's always worth the effort, even if you're disappointed on occasion, it's always worth the effort, because you're just sitting here. So by this point, I think by the time you arrived, he had all this stuff was kind of put away, and he'd moved on to something else. And the way our afternoon sort of played out was just this sort of stream of like, there's sort of waves of him bringing different types of stuff, right? I mean, I've got a thing here that just says, he brought us endless things to look at until James had no hands. So at one point you were sort of like, can you hold this? And I was like, well, I'm also trying to photograph. And there's just sort of like books of like flyers. There was like magazines. There were like the little books with the record collection that he had. Like you could choose what you wanted to listen to.
Even more than that, he brought out some old original copies of the Japanese Blues Society, which I wouldn't say magazine. I've got written down magazine, but it was really what in America we used to call a fanzine. A very, very like simply put together thing that you would just make photocopies and staple and distribute to your friends. That was the Japanese Blues Society. He pulled out a whole notebook full of concert ticket stubs, including, Led Zeppelin. I was like, okay, so you're into the blues and you're also into the heavy rock, but then he's got like this whole wall full of Julie London and Doris Day records, and you're like, wow, okay, that sort of mixture is not one that I think we've ever seen. And we actually got into a little bit of the blues conversation too, because I've often thought, and I think I've noted it here on the podcast and definitely on my own podcast, that as many jazz bars as there are and have been all around Japan, there's not even been a fraction of the number of blues bars. And it's always been interesting why that is, or, why that never really happened. But he had said that, well, yeah, jazz really was the dominant one, but there was a subset of blues fanatics. And so we would get together and make these kinds of fanzines and hold like basically, Friday night jam sessions. And then he said, oh yeah, we've even had some live blues shows in here. And when he said that, I thought I misheard him. Because I was like, wait, there's simply no physical space that you could have a gig in here, let alone have any customers. And he was like, no. You see the little space in the back? right behind the bathroom, that's where you can fit like 3 people standing. And so we just crammed in about 20 people here in the front. And I was like, 20 people? We've got 6 in here right now, and it feels crowded. And he was like, well, some were standing behind the counter in the kitchen, you know? And I was
it's wild.
Like,
I mean,
amazing.
it's like if you imagine on an airplane, I'm sure most people listening have been in an airplane. If you imagine the sort of the galley bit at the back where they put in the trolleys with the food and the coffee on like a regular plane, not even like a long haul flight, just a regular plane. So you've got the corridor that runs up, and it's that sort of space. There's a couple of toilets, and everybody has to kind of move around each other to function. It's like that sort of level of space, right? And like in there, you've got like 3 musicians playing, and then and not only that, it's not like a place either where you can lean. Like you could be like leaning against walls, but if you're in there, if you're like leaning on something or you're leaning against something, the chances are you're going to either knock something precious over or you're going to damage something that's on the wall. So
every
it must
space,
be a very intense experience.
Every single space in the wall is covered in either an album. There were some like sort of beautiful drawings that a local artist had done of musicians. There's an old kind of Coca-Cola signs from the States. And again, with the, getting back to the sort of weird variety of stuff, like in that little space in the back, there's like a large poster of Taylor Swift, which I immediately took a photo of to send to my daughter. I was like, to say like, hey, look, we spotted Tay-Tay at one of our jazz joints. Like, I just, it was so surprising because I think when we were heading up there, we were like, oh yeah, that's the Dixieland Jazz one in Saitama, which is probably, in Chiba, sorry, which is probably why it had been low on my list. Not a huge Dixieland guy, not a huge vocal jazz guy. But if I had known that it would be like, yeah, what a shock to our regular listeners. So getting in there and then seeing this huge mixture was, I mean, yeah, it was completely a knockout.
Yeah, it's quite surreal. I've actually got, so I obviously saw the Taylor Swift poster, but it's actually also next to the legendary One Day in Harlem photograph. And then there was also a kind of not quite Playboy type, like 70s Playboy image. It wasn't quite that far, but that's sort of, the kind of one that you would see in an 80s film, like up in a garage, like mechanic's garage.
Yes, that's right.
Somewhere near the till. It was just like, okay. And then actually when I went into the toilet, which was also an experience in itself, because it too was covered in posters and flyers. I noted when I came out that there was a poster of a photograph by Nakadara, the legendary Nakadara-san, who we've often talked about, the owner, master of Doug, but also a very, very accomplished jazz photographer. And next to his poster was just a postcard of Sandra Bullock in her underwear. Back in the heyday of in her 90s heyday, so they're eclectic doesn't quite scratch the surface.
I mean, hey, listen, man, Master, he's 74 years old. He knows what he likes. And he's
a big fan of speed.
I mean, hey, listen, who doesn't like a little bit of Sandra? And I was actually more intrigued though by the poster of Frank Sinatra doing an ad for ANA for All Nippon Airways, which I had no idea.
Right.
I mean, but remember back in those days, there were, because nobody would have ever seen this. So like these days, a lot of celebrities just become spokespersons for whoever, but in those days it was sort of like this secret. It was like, well, you're not going to do that in the States because you look like a sellout, but if you go over to Japan, you can make a whole bundle of cash. So if you go on YouTube, you can see all those kind of vintage commercials of like Sammy Davis Jr., Charles Bronson, Alain Delon, all doing commercials on Japanese TV in the 70s. And little did we know that Frank was a spokesperson for A&A. I was just like kind of like, and so he's got that big poster, but it's sort of like lower behind like the sofa, so I only caught the top of it, And I was there's just no part of this shop at all doesn't have something interesting to look at on the walls.
Yeah, I mean, just overstimulation, I think, is probably the word that sums it up. I mean, you could just spend quite literally days in there just looking at things, tiny little things stuck up here, there, and everywhere. A couple of highlights for me was a poster, sort of a kind of a curtain advertising tea, which said, tea drives away the droops. And then says Mrs. T.Pott, Mr. T.Pott, beg your pardon. That was I quite enjoyed that. There was also a tucked away in behind the speaker was a kind of about a foot high replica of Colonel Sanders. And he sort of had he had these kind of beads around his neck, which made him look like he'd been. It was a bit like Colonel Sanders had gone on a gap year to India. It's just so bizarre. Like the mixture of stuff was just beyond. And I've just written down here as well. Like, I mean, this man, I would say, is the true definition of a collector. I mean, everything he had was pristine. Everything he had was catalogued. It was filed. He was able to access, like, even in that small space, and a man of that age, he was able to access everything very quickly and very easily. I think he said they'd been open 9 years, and he said his wife was 71, so I guess he was in and around that age as well, possibly slightly older. The quote that you missed, I think, before you came was when he was playing sort of more kind of Dixie and New Orleans type stuff, and then actually he went on and played a bit of jump blues kind of thing as well. But I made a comment about the George Lewis poster, and he just said, "Well, George Lewis is my Miles Davis." So that kind of helps you locate his musical.
But
where his real
allegiance lies. It's just so interesting too, though, because I've got in the notes here, like, not only, like, he said that he went on consecutive weeks to see Sarah Vaughan and then Wilson Pickett, and I was like, Jesus, man, that is just full. I mean, the dude was out there, obviously getting to every possible show that he could and buying tons.
He was doing a lot of gigs, right?
Yeah,
that ticket book was absolutely jammers.
It was completely full. It was also interesting just to see, as a side note, like the sheer amount of gigs that was going on in Japan in the 1970s and 80s. I mean, it was nuts, right? You know, so much more than today. It's not even close. So seeing all of those was just, it was a real thrill. The other two things that really stuck out about the visit that I have in the notes here was cookie stolen yet again. And
that was the one. That was the day.
Getting the hang of this photo thing. Why did I say that?
I think you were the latter one. I think you were sort of pleased that you took a good picture of me for once. I think that was it.
I think it was the first time you've offered praise on my photo.
You did actually do a good job, which was kind of. I mean, I wonder how much you were helped by the very aesthetic background. But yeah, fair play. I'll give you that one. Unlike the cookie, which I didn't give you, because I think that was like a muscle memory thing, right? Because I've just got so used to like sitting in these places and then seeing stuff left, and so I just assumed that cookie was also mine. So it was just when you sat back down, you're like, "Oh, where's my cookie?" And it's like, "Oh, sorry, did you want that?" I just got so used to you not eating things.
For a change, it wasn't some like old rank coleslaw that had just been in the fridge for like a week, or or like a squid cracker,
tiny dried fish.
Yeah. It was actually something edible with quite a damn good cup of coffee too at Tea Garden, which came in handy after the long journey to get there. So
it's all a blur of coffees, to be honest. But they came out at the end. Go on, sorry.
No. I was just going to say it was really funny because, because of the trip up there was long and it was a dreary day and the Gold Coast back streets were extremely gray and depressing. And it's just like going in there for an hour, coming out, just both of us just felt like immediately on a high the first place of the day,
Yeah, it was that. Yeah, absolutely. You just think like everything else peels away. It happens time and time again. Like, no matter how stressful it is, or it's wet or blah blah blah, whatever. You're like, you don't want to leave your house. I totally understand if the situation had been reversed, but you just get there and it all just peels away. I mean, it's just so lovely. And actually, at the end, they came out. His wife also came out from behind the counter and. They took their masks off for a photo, which again, to me, is always kind of a bit of a revelation because it just to me at least, it always suddenly feels like, oh, this is the actual person I've been talking to, because it's just so anonymizing, I think, when you have that mask on, and then suddenly it's like, oh, this is what you look like. And so they took their masks off. We got a nice photograph with them. A lot of free gifts, if I remember. A lot of omiyage. We got some sort of senbei type crackers forced on me as I was leaving. There was also the bucket. There was the bucket with the key rings.
Yes,
I remember.
Yes. So
he made these
a postcard. It's like a laminated postcard with a picture of the joint. And on a keyring, I've got it on my desk. Yeah,
it's really weird because if you work in a Japanese office or a Japanese company, you'll recognize these instantly. But what they are, they're like a hard, clear plastic laminated pocket. But it's you can put things in and out of them. So things like schedules and signs telling you what to do and what not to do, and you often see them all around like Japanese kind of corporate buildings and other places as well. And so what he'd done is he'd sort of taken some photographs of the place, like some of it was the actual place, then other was just sort of random things on the wall, printed those out quite badly, and then double-sided them and then put them inside these little laminated pockets. And as if that wasn't enough, then there was also a hole in them, so with a little kind of like metal clip so you could hook it onto your key ring or your belt. And it was a Golden Week sort of special. So he was like, oh, Golden Week's nearly over, but here you go. And like, so we passed this bucket round and we got to take one each.
Oh, I mean, it was amazing. And those, hey, listen, the senbei and the little candies came in handy on the way because we hadn't really eaten any lunch. And so we had more train rides ahead of us. And so that was, oh, God, they were just a lovely couple, man. They were just lovely.
The loveliest couple.
And also, it's just funny because I people have asked me, like, oh, you got people listen to the podcast or friends, and they're like, well, you and Philip, you must be having to, like, every trip that you come back, have to go further and further out into the sticks. And I'm like, no, man, like, we've been doing this for 11 years, and we never got to Tea Garden. It's not that far up in Chiba, but it's far enough, and it's just another place that was on the list. It was like, okay, we will get there eventually. And we show up, and it's just immediately one of the most memorable afternoons that we've had. After all this time of going around the Kanto area, there's still more places like this to find. Yeah.
I mean, just to be clear, any listeners who feel like they've been cheated by the 10th anniversary, it's actually just 10 years, unless we're now in 2026 and I've miscalculated. But the point remains, we've been doing it for a long time. And
did
also,
I say,
as you said...
Did I say 10th?
You said 11 years, just slipping an extra one. Please don't do that, because like as we get older, we need those years more and more. So don't start shortchanging.
I'm time slipping all over the place these days. That's not good. Yeah.
Talking of shortchanging, though, we got the opposite compliment as we left. Perhaps one of the most flattering compliments, because and probably largely to do with the size of this space. But I don't know if you remember, just as we were leaving, when we both stood up, the man, which is a common thing that you get people mention. It's very common that this is mentioned to you when you're in Japan, is how tall you are. And I think when we both stood up, he said, "Oh, you're both very tall. What would you be, 2 meters?" And I was like, I mean, I wish. I'm pretty sure I'm a good 15 centimeters shy of 2 meters, but thanks anyway.
I couldn't understand. That has to be an age thing, though, because it's like 200 centimeters. I mean, 2 meters. That's for all the American listeners, that's about 6'6". You don't meet many 6'6" people. Okay. I remember saying to you, as
we're leaving, like if I was 2 meters tall, I wouldn't be in Chiba on a rainy day photographing a jazz bar. I'd be sitting back at my pad that the NBA had paid for. I mean, if I was that tall,
I was just thinking, if I was that tall, we wouldn't be fitting into half of these jazz kisses that we go to, because we'd just be bumping into everything. But
you just stick your head in,
that
like, or
was
put your legs in.
Really, really funny. Like 200, like what? Like, okay,
I know.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that was Jazz in Tea Garden. Absolute belt, as you said, total belter. What a way to start the day! Incredible start, and then we moved on. Not particularly far, to another place. I don't even remember how this came about. I think this feels to me like one of these places that we kind of, in looking around and trying to kind of collate information and put together a plan, this one sort of popped up as another place, and it was almost like, oh, let's have a look at this place while we're still out there. Is that fair?
Yeah, because so the next place is it wasn't very far down into a little bit closer to Chiba City. But it was one of those places that is new or was new to us because it's completely off the grid. Like there's no social media presence or web presence at all. And that was why it was just one that I don't think we had ever really heard of. And it's called Jazz and MCs, MC apostrophe S. And if you look up in Japanese for this place, you will find some blogs and a couple articles. There's one, and if Japanese readers or people who live in Japan will know the magazine Brutus. If you look at the Brutus website, there's somebody who's wrote a little bit about it, but there's not a lot of pictures of it. There's not a lot of information. There's a simple website from 2019 that does not seem to be updated, and all it talks about is the coffee. There's not even a picture of it. So we didn't really know what to expect showing up.
It's like all those people who opened a Twitter account and then never used it.
Oh,
it's the same kind
we've
of
been
thing,
to
right?
we've been to a few places like that before, right? You know, where it's just been like, yeah, or they made a website in 2010 and it's never been changed. You know, somehow they kept the domain. So, but
forgot the password, can't log in, change any information.
As we showed up though, like right from the train platform, you can see the sign, and I was kind of like, oh wow, that does look like a proper joint. And so we came out and around, and Philip, I'll let you describe it though. Like what happened when we walked in? What did we notice like immediately as we walked in?
Well, I mean, we didn't notice too much because it was sort of pitch black.
That's right.
Like we're standing outside, and like it's kind of this orange building. It's got this kind of fake brick, kind of cladding, and like a wooden door. So, and then when we went in, it was like, is it open? But like there was someone there, but it was like the lights. It's a bit like either when there's a power cut, or when this is sometimes happens in the UK, is when it gets too hot in the summer, shops, because they have no proper aircon, just turn off all the lights. So like you'll go into a shop that's open for business, but like it's just kind of dark. It's just kind of dark, and it was a dark place anyway. Like it was all kind of wooden and black, kind of black and wooden fittings. And so yeah, we just wandered in, and it was very much like, Are you open? And I think he had literally just opened because if I remember correctly, his coat was kind of abandoned on one of the counters. He'd obviously just sort of come and tossed that down and then thought, right. And probably the last thing he was expecting was 4 meters of height to be coming into his bar.
Well, no.
At like 3 o'clock.
I had called him. He was one of the places we had to call, because there was just no other information. It was like, are you really open? Do these opening hours on Google match or whatever? And he had said like, oh, no, I'll be here. That's no problem. I sometimes open at 4, but I'm sometimes open early. It was one of those kinds of things, right? And so we took it to be like, oh, okay, so 4 is like the usual time. So he will be there at 4, and that was sort of like right when we arrived. And but obviously he had only arrived then too, and so he proceeded to talk to us quite at length. A really, really sweet dude, Suzuki-san. He's got a lot of records. Now, it's just strange because I'm looking at the photos again as we're talking, and I've got written down 2,500 albums.
Yeah, same. That's what he said, yeah.
It looks, from the pictures, it looks like a lot more, actually. I'm wondering if maybe the bottom racks that you can't see behind the counter are not filled, because we've been to so many places and heard a lot of different estimates of their collection sizes, and that looks a lot more to me. But anyway, he's got that. He's got some unbelievably beautiful black and white jazz photos all around the bar. And as we learn, it's because he, yet again, another jazz joint owner, who was pals with Nakadaira-san, the great Nakadaira-san, R.I.P., from Shinjuku Doug fame, the great photographer and jazz bar owner. So he knows him. And it was funny, do you remember, because this guy Suzuki-san at Jazz and MCs, like he seemed a lot younger to me, and yet he told us when we were leaving, he's like, I'm 77. And I was like...
Yeah, this guy didn't look 77. And I think, didn't he say... I mean, I was really dropping in and out of this one because I was like photographing, and I was sort of half getting the conversation, but I think he said that I thought that he had known Nakadaira originally in some sort of business capacity, like they'd been selling something to him, because he did say that he'd quit his salaryman life, so he was a salary man at one point, and this place he opened in 1986, right? So I thought he'd said that he had some kind of business connection, was how he came across Nakadara in the first place, because he had his business card, right? You remember he went and got his card out of the
yes.
a little box or something. But I was sort of I had like one ear on the conversation, and the rest of the time I was just like focused on.
He was, because he was doing some work peripheral to the music industry, because he had a beautiful Miles Davis poster.
That's right. Yeah.
In towards the back behind the record players, and one of those ones that's sort of like almost like floor to ceiling type. You know, like the kind that we saw, the most famous one, of course, in Jazz Room Stick in Shinjuku, which is now gone. But so he had one of those, and then he told me, he's like, "Oh yeah, I got that because when there was a merger in Japan of some of the music, I forget which ones now. I can't read it in the notes; it's too messy. It just says record company merger, got the poster. So it was like, okay, so obviously he was at some event working in the industry, and then he was able to get that, and then put it in the bar when he opened it in 1986. So he has been there for 40 years. So he would have been only 37 when he quit working to open the place. And I mean, Philip, do you remember, this was not a lively station at all? And it kind of made me wonder, it's like, how has this guy been in business for 40 years? And yet he said...
Yeah, I think... I think for me, it was like... I sort of wrote that it was a beautiful spot, but it was a little sad. And like, it's one of those places to me that it kind of... I feel like you can imagine it in the kind of latter bubble years, absolutely like booming, no matter what station, people just dropping like insane amounts of money for stupid bottles of whiskey and this, that, and the other. It just has that feel, there's a few other places. I can't think, maybe somewhere like the Hartsfield place we talked about.
Yeah,
but there's sort of like, there's a kind of a, like, inadvertently retro feel to it. And it just you can kind of imagine, or Bricks might be another example that we will talk about in a later episode, where you can imagine like the heyday of this bar where it was just buzzing, and then obviously now it just feels a little bit sad. And,
especially thinking like in the bubble years. So this sort of part of Chiba would have been slowly being developed into a new suburb. It's not too far from Chiba Station, so you would imagine that people buying houses, like you said, people buying really expensive bottle of whiskeys to keep as a bottle keep, and obviously for his jazz fan customers, bringing in a lot of records, and so you could imagine it being a very lively, almost party type of atmosphere, and now it just has that sort of like dusty feel where it's probably the customers come by much. When he even said that, he said like, well, we're getting older, so some of my regulars, they only come by once a month now instead of once a week. Yeah,
although it is like you said. I mean, I think we commented at the time. It's not a million miles from Chiba Station, so like it's not like you're going way out to get to it. So, but again, I suppose it's if you're not that far from Chiba Station, then a lot of people are going in there rather than the reverse direction, like coming out specifically to that, unless it's somewhere or it's two idiots like us just trying to find these places. So, but yeah.
And he was really, really clued into the whole jazz scene, though, because you remember he pulled out a whole bunch of like photocopied newspaper articles and magazines about about the local scene. And because once we told him, obviously we were speaking Japanese, and we told him about all the different places we've been to and the different gigs and whatnot. So it seemed to me that he was actually one of those people who was really, really happy to hear that we were doing this. It wasn't just a polite thing with this guy. He was pretty sincerely like, oh, wow, this is really amazing what you guys are doing. I almost felt bad I didn't have a book to give him.
Yeah, I mean, including, of course, one newspaper article which featured the one and only DJ Otsuka as well. So we were like, oh, we know her. We know her. She was like, what?
Great friend of the show, DJ Otsuka. Exactly. That was really surprising. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a really interesting place and like a lovely guy, and very much like you got that sense of like he enjoyed us coming and having a chat rather than it being kind of tolerated or just couldn't really be bothered. And I think also one of those guys who had obviously, like, if you know anything about Japan, to quit a stable company job at whatever we worked out there, 37 is no mean feat, right? Like that's a big deal back then, to give up that safety and that security to open somewhere like that. So it just shows the commitment.
Years, when salaries were booming, and you can imagine there were probably been people in his circle or family like, wait, you're doing what? You've quit your job to do what? But obviously he's made it this far, and I just hope now that I remember that's not too far from Chiba Station, I definitely like to go there for an evening session. Although, do you remember the great beer catastrophe of jazz MCs? Behind the bar, he had this huge box from Carlsberg, the Danish beer, and I was like, oh, you know what? It's about that time I could use one. I was like, okay, can I get a beer and get a Carlsberg? He's like, oh, no, that I don't have any. All I've got is cans of Asahi. I was like, what? Cans?
Yeah,
Cans.
What I remember is your reaction initially, and we just come in, and you're like, it's always that thing where, like, I feel like if it was me, I would go, oh, okay, yeah, that's fine, but you just literally go, and then you're like, have you got anything else? And he's like, no, and you're like, like, there's no sort of, okay, well, I'll have that then. And then I think you proceeded to sort of rant about how there were boxes of other cans, but they weren't in the fridge. That really upset you, if I remember correctly. It was some other beer.
Listen, I take my beer drinking very seriously, and I had to order a ginger ale. Come on, before we ride the train, you don't want me drinking a ginger ale. The other thing that Philip, we did not talk about this, but it fooled me because I'll send you the picture later, but up behind one of his JBL speakers, he had a bunch of different speakers around the place. I saw a signed poster from like a gig in France, and I looked up and I was like, oh my God, there's our man again. Because it was a Donald Byrd gig, okay? But then underneath Donald Byrd, I saw Byrd, Taylor, Watkins Davis, and it was all signed, and I was like, man, another Richard Davis sighting. But it wasn't. It was
there he is.
But it was
out
Walter.
there with a Sharpie.
When I went closer, it was Walter Davis, and I was like, okay. But it's still really cool to see that poster up there. And I mean,
the thing I would say, about that is that I think you gave it away there when you said I had to go closer, because as we know, if you have to go closer to Richard Davis' signature, it's not Richard Davis because he signs it very, very large.
Also, right? It's more likely going to be on the bathroom door instead of a poster gig.
He doesn't slip those signatures in. He really likes to make a meal of them. So now I'm surprised you haven't raised this already. So I'm gonna just bring this in because I know you were particularly taken with. I mean, this man sounds, the more we talk about him, the more he sounds like sort of a character from a Murakami novel. But basically, he had quit his life to open the bar. But I think until that, basically, he'd been kind of telling us about his life. And I don't remember. And sometimes when they get into jobs and you're talking about the technical side, we're like, yep. But it was some sort of technical specs or something that he was doing. And that's why I think it was connected to bars or restaurants. There's something to do with sound or something anyway. But I do remember him specifically saying that basically in order to get through the work week, the only way that he could do that was by doing jazz stuff on the weekends. So he sort of had this life where he was obviously doing the daily grind as a salaryman in the weekdays, and then, total release, total enjoyment, total pleasure. On Saturday and Sunday,
that was the source
going to jazz places.
That was the source of another one of what is a growing list for our eventual,
so you do remember.
Yeah, it's on the next page of the notes of our, we'll have to make a glossary of TJJ, great terminology we've heard. But yes, he said that, so on the weekend, recovering from the awful Japanese work week, the only thing he could do was to go out to jazz gigs and jazz kisses because jazz was his battery. And I was just right away, I was like, oh my God, I got to write that down. Jazz
is my battery.
Jazz is my battery. Yes. The more violent jazz, the better. So, that was, I mean, you could totally understand, given what we know about Japanese corporate culture and corporate work life, and if you're not 100% committed to what you're doing, you would need that recharge for the jazz time on the weekends. I mean, I need it. That's why I do that every weekend anyway. So, yeah, great dude, Suzuki-san. I've got to go back up to Chiba and visit there before he closes down.
Well, look, that was Jazz and Tea Garden, and then MCs or MC apostrophe S or MCS, I don't know. But either way, quite an afternoon. And I suppose in some ways, a day of two halves, really, because in the next episode, we're going to go to another new place that we'd come across actually weirdly through something that had popped up online, and I don't think either of us were aware of it. So we headed back into Tokyo and we went to another place, which we'll cover in episode 89. And also then I kind of continued on with this adrenaline rush. I thought I'll just ride this as long as it's going to go. So after that, I ended up going to 3 more places on my own after you'd gone home to walk the dog. So there's a lot to cover there. One new place and a couple of old
going home. This time
favorites.
I was not going home to walk the dog that day. I told you I was going home
do the dishes.
No, to have dinner with my son. And to study.
Okay, well,
with him,
not
because
feel like a complete dick.
He was getting ready for exams, so I had to go home and study with him. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. As you know, education does come first. Even before
yes,
the jazz.
It does. Absolutely.
You
it does.
lifelong educator. You can respect that. And of course, I got home and he was like, Dad, I don't feel like studying tonight. I'm good. I think I understand it. Good night. Ran off to his room. So I missed out on what turned out to be a very lively looking evening from the photos you sent me. So, but we will cover that.
It was brilliant, actually. So in the next episode, we'll cover that final place on that day, and then a new place to both of us. That's definitely worth visiting if you're in the Tokyo area, and then a couple of old favorites, and one in particular where I just had a really lovely evening. I had the whole place to myself. And I hadn't actually been there, I think, since possibly 2016, 2017. So it was pretty cool to go back there and spend that evening. So that's it for episode 88. James, you have a lovely rest of your day. Mine's just beginning, and we'll talk very soon.
Yes, enjoy the brunch, lunch, and whatever else you're getting up to in beautiful Belfast. And I am going to go downstairs, crack a beer, and check out the latest edition of the Barracan Beat, my Sunday night radio show. Take it easy, buddy.
Bye.
Bye.